Hello fellow YouTubers and fellow Hallicrafters collectors. Well, I have just finished completing 2 videos on 2 of the large boat anchor Hallicrafters receivers, the SX110 and the S-20R, both large, heavy 8-tube receivers. So today I would like to feature the little S-38 compact shortwave receiver. You could hardly call this a boat anchor. This receiver was made in 1946 and was intended to be an entry-level shortwave receiver for the beginning radio amateur or the beginning shortwave listener, and it was priced affordably at $47.50. Many people could afford this radio. The S-38, or at least the model number S-38, went through many changes over the years from 1946 to 1961. Some electrical changes, but mostly cosmetic changes. The way the radio appeared, the shape of the case, the knobs, the layout. The 1961 version was called the S-38E, E for Edward. The S-38E in 1961 bore absolutely no resemblance to the original version in 1946. Let me show you what the 1961 S-38E receiver looks like. To keep the cost of this receiver down, Hallicrafters made it an AC-DC set, and that eliminated the expensive power transformer. I think of this receiver as really a souped-up version of the famous All-American 5. All-American 5 was a 5-tube table radio, an AC-DC model for broadcast band reception, and it was very popular during the 40s, 50s, and even into the 1960s. To turn an All-American 5 receiver into a short-wave receiver, Hallicrafters added some coils up front to receive short-wave, and then he had to add a band selector switch. He had to add some controls that were appropriate for short-wave listening, like a band spread, and he added a 6th tube. He added a 12 SQ7 on the original S-38. The 12 SQ7 functioned as a BFO, beat frequency oscillator. And if you don't know what that is, let me just say it's something that would enable the owner to receive Morse code. And back in the day when this radio was made, Morse code was much more popular than it is today. Today I think it's almost extinct. Well, let me show you a close-up of the front panel, show you the various controls, and explain briefly what each one does. And here is a very nice close-up of the front of the radio. This large knob is main tuning, which operates the main tuning dial. This knob is band spread or very fine tuning, which operates the fine tuning dial here. The band spread dial is not calibrated, it's merely marked from 10 to 90 as a logging scale. Over on the left we have a switch that will select internal speaker or headphones, which you would plug into the back of the receiver. This switch will select regular broadcast AM or code CW. This is an automatic noise limiter switch on and off. This control controls the pitch of the continuous wave or the pitch of the code signal you're listening to, higher or lower depending upon personal preference. Here is the band switch selector, bands 1 through 4. Band 1 is regular broadcast, 2, 3, 4 are shortwave bands. Here is a regular old volume control, and when you turn it counterclockwise fully, it turns the receiver off. This is a receive standby switch, which would only be used by a radio amateur while receiving or transmitting. Turning the radio around, you can see that the back is missing. Originally, this radio came with a heavy composition back, and keeping the inside of the radio tightly buttoned up was a very good idea, because as you will see in a moment, touching the chassis could prove fatal. Here are terminals to attach 2 different types of antenna. First is the simple long wire antenna, and then we have 2 terminals for something called a half-wave doublet antenna. Over here on the right side we have a brand new polarized AC power cord that I will get into in just a minute. Here's something that looks rather strange. This is a 2-conductor headphone jack, 2 separate conductors. Headphones used to come like this, 2 wires and 2 little plugs that you could insert into these 2 little holes. Now, as you remember, on the front of this receiver, there was a switch to select either headphones or internal speaker. So after you plugged your headphones in, you had to manually select headphone to turn off the internal speaker. Now, this method was was improved some years later with the introduction of a special jack that was always mounted conveniently on the front panel. This special jack had a built-in on-off switch that was connected to the internal speaker. So when you plugged your headphones in, the switch automatically disconnected the internal speaker. Very clever, I thought. This radio does not use any of the miniature tubes. All tubes are the old 8-prong style that look like this. This happens to be a 12SK7. And look at the size of this gigantic IF transformer. You sure don't see those anymore. Unfortunately, the S-38, along with some other Hallicrafters radios, like the Echophone series, had a built-in electrical safety hazard, something that was very dangerous. The chassis could become hot. By hot, I don't mean warm to the touch. I mean electrically charged with 120 volts and very dangerous. Back in the days when this radio was made, the wall plugs were not polarized. The 2 prongs were identical, same size, same shape, which meant the plug could be put into the wall socket either way. Now keep in mind that one of these prongs is wired directly to the metal chassis inside this radio, and the other prong is wired to something called the rectifier tube. Also keep in mind that your wall outlet has 2 vertical slots. One of them is called ground, it's neutral, relatively harmless. The other one is hot, charged with 120 volts of electricity. Depending upon how you happen to insert your plug into the wall outlet, the prong connecting to the chassis might go into the hot side of the outlet, thereby making your chassis hot and very dangerous. And I suppose there was a 50% chance of getting a hot chassis, depending upon how you happen to insert the plug into the wall socket. Now, Hallicrafters, of course, was aware of this problem, the safety hazard, and they had to come up with a way to keep the cabinet or the case always safe, so it never became hot and dangerous. So what they did was isolate the chassis from the cabinet with rubber grommets, non-conductive rubber grommets. So the case was electrically isolated from a chassis which could become hot. Now the problem is, this was all right in those days, but what happens to rubber over a period of 60-some years? It dries out, it hardens, it splits, it cracks, ultimately falls apart. So if you happen to come across this radio today that has not been altered for safety, beware. You may have a hot chassis, and you may also have a hot cabinet, depending upon the condition of the grommets and how you insert the plug in your wall socket. Now there is a cure for this. This radio can be updated for safety, and I will explain that to you next. Modifying these old radios for electrical safety is not really that difficult. If you can use a soldering iron and read simple instructions, you can probably do it yourself. And the instructions are posted online. A gentleman named John Furring has posted a wonderful website explaining exactly how to rewire this radio for safety. It's done step by step in simple language, and I'm sure you could do it yourself. To get to this website, just do a search for Old Radio Hot Chassis. Old Radio Hot Chassis will take you right to John's website. I'm sure you've noticed that nowadays electrical plugs are polarized. There is a wide blade and a narrow blade, and the plug can only go into the wall socket one way. You cannot reverse it 180 degrees. It goes in one way. The wide blade always connects to the neutral side of the power socket, and this wide blade runs through the wire and must be connected directly to the metal chassis. If you remember the way things were set up before, you had a 50-50 chance of connecting the hot side to the metal chassis. But with the polarized plug, The cold side, also called the ground side, always connects to chassis. The hot side, which comes from the narrow prong or the narrow spade, is connected to the on-off switch and then to something called a rectifier tube. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. It will be explained in John's website. So this way, your cabinet is always safe and your chassis is always safe. I found this radio about 10 years ago at the Rose Bowl swap meet in Pasadena. It was a surprise and a wonderful find. No, I don't buy radios on eBay. Buying something off of eBay takes all the fun out of the hunt and finding something unexpected. So this came from the Rose Bowl. I redid the dial cords, recapped it, and of course replaced the power cord with a modern 2-conductor polarized power cord. This little radio plays very well for a 5-tube radio. Yes, I know it has 6 tubes, but I'm not going to count the oscillator tube because that's not really part of reception. This is a modified 5-tube radio. Anyway, that's it for now, folks. It is a few days before Christmas, December 2015. So I'll wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and thank you very much for watching. See you again next year.